Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carla Balo from the Center for Automotive Research, and I'd like to welcome you to the second webinar that's jointly shared between MICHauto and CAR regarding the long-term impact of COVID-19 and the automotive industry. Today, we're going to look at it from two different angles, and one is from the talent pipeline, which we already were struggling before COVID, and how has COVID either provided more opportunities and or created more challenges, and in what segments. And then we'll hear about from academia, what they're thinking and how they're going to help to fill that talent pipeline. So thanks for joining, and I'll turn it over to Glenn for some housekeeping.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you to you and your team for the partnership. We really appreciate it. We've been in this together, and we'll be in it together into the future, so we really appreciate it. Two housekeeping pieces for the audience. One is we won't be doing Q&A with the panelists because we're going to move really fast and we got a lot of things to talk about. But if you have a question or you have a comment, please put it in the chat. We will get back to you. If you have a very specific question and looking for some information from one of the panelists or either MICHauto or CAR, we will definitely get back to you. Secondly, we'll post the final video of the session. So if there's somebody that you know that didn't catch it, you'll be able to find it on our websites, both of ours. So with that, we're going to get going. I'm going to introduce the first panel, and we have three great panelists from the industry. First of all, Peter Hungerford, who is joining us from the west side of the state from ADAC Automotive. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. Eric James, coming to us from Ford Motor Company. Thank you for joining us, Eric. And then Renee McLeod, who heads up all of human resources and the foundation at Adient. So Renee, and thank you all of you for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Jerome Vaughn, who is the news director at 101.9 WDET, one of my favorite stations. And Jerome, we appreciate your work and we appreciate you joining us today. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn and Carla. And we'll jump right in because time is tight today. So I want each of you to think about this question, and I'll go through each of you, but I want you to tell us how you initially thought your business life was going to change when you first heard about COVID-19. And we'll start with you, Peter.
Yeah. Well, we were fortunate to have operations in China. So, with those operations and when it first started hitting in China, we coordinated quite closely with the team there. So we had a little bit of preview of what was happening. And while we didn't know exactly how it was going to cross the ocean and cross Europe, et cetera, we began to learn from that team and prepare our organization. So as we learned how serious it was, we began to really understand how this could impact and disrupt our operations, not just the operations, but our people within it, and trying to create and maintain a safe and healthy work environment. So we were fortunate to have that preview. And again, we didn't know exactly how it was going to shake out, but it gave us some time to get our mind around it and prepare for it.
How about you, Eric?
Thanks, Jerome. But very similar to Peter, at Ford, we have obviously operations around the globe and certainly a lot of operations in China as well. So we did have a preview, very similar to Peter's experience with their company. And then I think we, set in and put in place some core principles, one being the safety of all our employees being the main number one principle, as well as just thinking through, as you can imagine, in our business, the supply chain is very vast, and we get a lot of parts from a variety of different places on the globe. And how might that impact potentially our production before we even went down for a period of time before we came back up in May, as we started to tick back up in the United States and then started to expand across the globe. So I think as we got deeper into it, we started thinking through other aspects of the business as well, and thinking about playbooks around safety. How would we bring people back into our what we call place-dependent work operations in order to keep them safe?
And Renee?
Same for us. We have a number of operations in China and all over the world. And so we did have a preview and some opportunity to prepare somewhat, although I'll say, even as we were going through and managing all of the complexities with the supply chain and the employees elsewhere in the world, I'm not sure we fully realized how hard it was going to hit us here in the United States. And so it was, I'd say, sort of a quick pivot to managing remote work. And in addition to managing the supply chain, just managing our employees, making sure we had network capability in order to all go online all at once. Certainly a lot of work to manage and maintain safety where we did have people in our facilities. And so we continue to work remotely. We've learned a lot along the way, for sure. Some that we'll keep and some that we'll hope to never have to experience again.
I'll start with you, Renee, with this question. It's along the same line. I think so many of us, we had an idea of what we might be into or changing. And given what all of you have said, how far, and I'm asking you this realistically, how far off base with what you initially thought?
I'm not sure how to necessarily quantify that. I think, as I think about early on, as we were managing through the situation in China, I'd say we were pretty far off base in terms of not really understanding how quickly this would go global, and how deeply we would be affected in our operations all over the world. So while we weren't necessarily planning for that and probably didn't anticipate as much as we should have in hindsight, I'd say that the situation in 08, 09 really, people have long memories. And so our ability to quickly address things like supply chain disruptions, cash flow concerns, how we manage our employees and furloughs, et cetera. We were able to respond incredibly fast. And I look at the industry itself, and one of the things that I think we as an industry should be proud of and should promote out there is how good we are at responding to these sorts of issues. We all did a lot of networking, a lot of sharing of stories, and I think we got the job done. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, but we work together, I think, across the customers, tier one supply, and we're seeing our way through.
Eric, how far off base were you with your predictions?
I think, we were anticipating, like Renee. I mean, we turned from one, Thursday or a weekend to everyone else being remote, working from home. The same thing, systems being ready. And it really, I think bore about how quickly we could change. And, Ford Motor Company is a company that, we move pretty quick. We produce a lot of stuff in mass. I mean, the shift, for example, to building ventilators and masks and gowns and really trying to help the country and the globe was really a gargantuan effort to just move quickly in that space. But with respect to employees, we set up weekly communication huddle meetings with employees at the senior leadership level, talking about what's happening with what are they feeling, taking polls, listening to them, creating potentially enhancing policies like an enhanced sabbatical, where we allow for people to take off a little more time at a particular percentage of pay, maintaining health care for employees. And I think we just continue to try to listen, learn, a lot of weekends, gathering work streams together to understand what was happening in different parts of the country, different parts of the globe, what's working, what's not working, reaching out to epidemiologists, getting their input, and then using a lot of data and analytics to make sure we were tracking, in particularly in states where we do business, what's happening, what could be happening in the future of that, and then understanding how we need to make our decisions around when we think we might be able to return to work, and then moving from there.
Peter?
Yeah, I look at our biggest learning opportunity, or at least perspective, and I'd say it's right at the time when we were ramping back up, and we had this mindset where we wanted to not have any cases in our facilities at all. And that was kind of unrealistic, to be honest with you. The nature of this thing is you're going to have one or two. And if you have just one or two, you're probably lucky. So, you know, it was just that. And once we started to have a few, we learned a few other things on how to help our team members become acclimated to this. You know, some of them we assumed would just, you know, report, take their temperature and report what they were feeling. But some of them needed to work. You know, they needed to come in and they needed that income. So we had to do a lot of education and communication to ensure they felt comfortable being honest about their health condition and help them recognize the impact, if they're not honest with themselves and us, what that could do to their colleagues in the company. And once we kind of got through that and gained that perspective, then I think things started to get a little more sustainable and predictable.
Let me ask, Eric, let me ask you this to begin with. We're 6 months in from, you know, Michigan being shut down, and a few months more since we really learned about the threat in China. When you think about COVID and its, you know, its impact on the industry, what sort of ideas have been swirling through your head about how the industry needs to change given where we are right now?
Great question, Jerome. I think on the business side, you know, it's amazing how resilient I think, you know, our dealer network has been in changing, making sure that, you know, how they shifted to, you know, how someone could buy one of our cars or trucks and do that in a contactless way, from either digitizing paperwork to ensuring that the person got a vehicle that was, you know, considered sanitized, clean, that they felt comfortable doing business with us, but yet in a way that changed the industry. So now, how might we now look at, you know, the way we're launching, you know, and you've seen either our Bronco launch or our F-150 launch, and doing that in a way that's totally digital and not in person at an auto show or in other type of mediums. But, you know, we're shifting that experience, I think, for our customers. And I think it's really cool the way, you know, we've launched our Bronco products, you know, hopefully continue to get more and more reservations in our system about that. But the outpour of, we like what you're doing, our branding around taking care of America, from a perspective of if you need help, how we can show up, how Ford Motor Company shows up to help America and in a tough time and in a pinch, I think just continues to demonstrate how uniquely we can continue to shift our business and our ability to help our customers, our dealers, our whole supply network to continue to keep the country moving and rolling.
Renee, what sorts of things do you think the industry is learning right now from COVID?
I think one of the most interesting learnings from my perspective is our ability to work remotely. I think that there has been a lot of, you know, trial and error maybe in terms of trying to figure out how to be more flexible in our work environment. And this was trial by fire, right? And I think that we came out of it, still in it, actually doing quite well. And so I think it's really changed our perspective on the purpose of an office, the purpose of our facilities. And so it's going to allow us to be a lot more flexible in terms of where our workforce resides, our footprint. And so I think while it opens up a lot of opportunities from a talent perspective, it also introduces some challenges for us, as that need to move and be physically located in one place becomes less and less important.
And Peter?
Similar to what Renee was saying, I hope we don't go back to a situation where we feel all this travel is necessary. You know, I myself, I'd spend 20 hours on a plane going to Asia or India, and it's some of it's not value added, frankly. And if we can focus our time and energy on serving our customers, building the best quality products, serving our employees versus all this travel, I think we're going to be better off as companies and an industry. So I think we have gotten much more comfortable with conversations and just doing business virtually like we are today, and getting very detailed or technical related activities completed much more efficiently. So we'll have to see if, you know, a year or so from now, if we get back into old habits.
One of the questions that I know came up when we were getting all of this set up a few days ago was really, does this working from home, having all this additional technology, does it make it easier or harder to recruit good people? I know that, you know, when it comes to computer engineers and software engineers, it's a pretty small percentage of college graduates that are gravitating towards the auto industry in those areas. Does this work from home allow you to do that more easily, or has it been harder? We'll start with you, Renee.
I think it really depends on what segment of the workforce you're looking at. So, you know, I think in terms of more experienced professionals, it might give us the opportunity to draw in talent from locations other than the Detroit area, because we have that opportunity to work remote. I think it's challenging for us when we think about the young, you know, entering the workforce. We, particularly, I'm speaking for tier one supply here, you know, we don't have a consumer brand. And so a lot of the impact we can have is getting out to colleges, going to career fairs and having conversations with kids, helping them understand what we do, how we work, and what they can learn from an opportunity at a place like Adient. So I think it's gonna open up some opportunities, but it certainly does create some challenges for us as well. I think when you talk about onboarding new hires, it's difficult when you don't have that opportunity to bring them into a team and a group. You know, while I'm proud of how well we've done with remote work, there's something in, you know, that human interaction that is necessary for people to really become part of a culture of an organization and become fully productive.
Peter, is this, of course, it's a challenge recruiting in the time of COVID. How much of an opportunity do you see it as at this point?
Well, I think you know, the actual recruiting process, at least for us, hasn't been too different. You know, when they learn about what our company has to offer, the positions, et cetera. When we then think about the team members who are currently here, we were fortunate to have the relationships among each other that help form what our culture is. But I think that's what the difficult part is, when new people come into the organization and we want to express what our purpose is, what our values are, how we work together, the expected behaviors. That's more difficult to welcome someone into that culture and orient them to that if it's purely virtual. Now, there's a part of this, I think, that is very attractive, where before, you know, there was not a lot of work from home type of activity. And we also have to balance the professionals in the organization that may have the flexibility to work remotely, and some in our more industrial and manufacturing facilities that do not. So, you know, I think finding that balance, trying to make sure that new team members are appropriately welcomed and oriented to our culture, that to me, that's the most significant challenge.
Okay. Eric, are you wringing your hands at night, staying up late, worrying about recruiting people during this pandemic in different ways?
You know what, Jerome, not so much worrying, but I think adapting. Later this afternoon, I am a part of the National Black MBA conference for Ford, and we've got a great setup to virtually entertain people. We were supposed to be in Washington, D.C. To do this conference, but you know, the National Black MBA is a huge conference. and it is being done 100% virtually. Now, I'll tell you, I'm praying and hoping it'll go really well. But I think what this does, it allows us to think through different challenges and try different things. We have continued to do virtual interviews. We actually did a virtual internship with 600 interns this summer, from engineering to HR to finance. And yeah, we made some modifications, but we wanted to provide that experience for those young folks we had made a commitment to literally almost 9 months or a year ago. And how did we go through that? We surveyed them. We talked to our people leaders. How did they do that? And I can tell you, there was an era of, well, I don't know, maybe we should cancel this year. And it's like, well, folks, we're going to lose a whole cycle of talent if we do that. That could be a huge gap for us. So we have to figure out how to adapt, how to embrace it. And I think, as we talk to other industries, as we were studying that, we came out and just say, hey, we're going to do it. We're going to figure it out. We're going to figure out how to get laptops and other information that the kids need to come on board. And I think that had an impact on other companies that, all right, if they're doing it, we're going to do it too and give it a try. So I think what I personally see is the ability to, let's be less fearful. Let's move on. Let's try some things. We may fail, but let's fail fast and then learn from that and then improve our processes as we look forward, because we don't know what to expect in the future.
And I think that's a great place to go, Eric, and I'll throw this right back at you, and then Renee and Peter, I'll ask you about this as well. How do you begin planning for a future in your industry that is so, at least right now, completely uncertain? There were so many things changing before, moving from old technology to new technology, moving from the automotive industry to the mobility industry. All of that was already going on, and now sort of the rest of the world has been upended by this pandemic in a way that we haven't seen at least in 100 years. How do you plan for such an uncertain future, Eric?
I think you have to get the right people in the room, continue to be thoughtful, strategic, stick to a plan. I don't think you can walk away from whatever your strategy and what you're trying to do. Engage your people, engage your customers, engage all of your partners, whether they be with the unions or dealers or suppliers, and think through how might the industry look? What does COVID do to a customer who wants to buy vehicles that I talked about before? What does it do with our relationships to go in and do a launch review for a vehicle that may be coming out in a year, when we have to do that virtually, when everybody's so used to going in, touching, feeling, sitting into a vehicle, and you're like, okay, how does that do testing, race tracking a vehicle to make sure it was going to perform the way we want it to perform? And then how do we manage the people aspect of, you need the right talent in the right place at the right time? So I think we're looking at how to collaborate in this space where we can do it safely, but yet bring people in that we might need to, without all due respect to the governor's orders and social distancing and safety. But we still sometimes need a space where we need people to get together to talk and collaborate. Body language. Hey, did you forget about this? Sometimes virtual world is great and we love all the technology, but there is still something missing when you can't personally sit down and see, hey Peter, what are you thinking about? I see something's on your mind. Hey Renee, looks like you got something to say. So I think we still have to figure out what is that element where we can find a safe and effective way to collaborate, but yet still think through what will we look like? What does future work look like post-COVID?
Peter, I saw you shaking your head there at a number of places. How do you move forward with a blindfold on?
Yeah. Well, I think that the strategic themes that have impacted our business were there before. And I don't blame COVID for creating those. It's just forced us to deal with them now. And those two are the acceleration of investment in automation, and two, the role of business K through 14 modernization. So there has been a shortage of direct labor, and now it's even greater. So that investment, the value proposition for investing in automation has changed, and that investment needs to accelerate. That really leads to then needing talented individuals in skilled trades, technical fields, and engineering. And what we see is that students today aren't excited about those fields. So I think what we can do as businesses, we can get more engaged in that process, and call it the K through 14. We can provide a learning environment to get them excited, the things that you're learning, how do you use it, what kind of careers can you have, support the career and technical education. And we can also be a bridge between, I'll call it 11th and 12th grade, where at that point, they may be old enough to work in an industrial environment, begin to start a career. And I know our organization does this, and many do, provide some education assistance in call it their first 2 years to an associate's degree. I think that process and being part of that process and intentional in that, and finding young people who are very interested in it and getting that next generation of talent interested in those fields are what we're going to need to do, because it's not happening on its own, but yet we're going to need it the way the technology and the industrial technologies are evolving.
All right, thanks. Renee, I'll ask you as well. How do you make a roadmap when you don't know what the road is in front of you?
I feel I've been in the automotive industry the majority of my career, and I feel like we are often faced with these sorts of situations. It's a cyclical industry. There are always new challenges, and I think that's one of the things that we respond to quite well in the industry. So I agree with Eric in that, you don't walk away from your core strategic priorities, but you've got to be flexible and adaptable in terms of how you accomplish them. And so, when I think about the talent pipeline, when I think about the benefit of working in this industry, certainly there's a ton of opportunity, as Peter mentioned, in terms of the technical areas. But what we really need and what we really benefit from is having adaptable, collaborative problem solvers that work in our organizations and can quickly pivot to new solutions and new ways of how we're going to achieve our strategic priorities. And so I think we'll do what we've always done, and that's we'll adapt and we'll learn and we'll continue to forge ahead.
All right. Well, we are out of time for this panel. I'll say thank you, Renee McLeod, Eric James, Peter Hungerford. Thanks so much for joining us today. And we're going to move on to our next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're sort of moving from the automotive side of the equation now. We're going to move to the academic side of the equation. And I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Susan Donarski is a professor of public policy education and economics at the University of Michigan. Russ Cavalhuna is president of Henry Ford College. And Dexter Sullivan is program manager of the Michigan Mobility Institute. Welcome to the three of you. I'll start off by asking you the same question that we started the last panel with, and we'll start with you, Russ. How did you imagine back in the early spring that COVID might affect your work life?
Well, I guess I could start with when we started to deal with the issues at an executive team level. Most of us believed the news reports that this would be like the flu and we might have to be a little more careful for 3 weeks. And then we pretty quickly moved to the reality that we're going to have to close the campus and shift 90% of our classes from face-to-face to online formats. And then we very quickly realized that we had a structural reassessment of our budget, which included layoffs. I had the very difficult reality of eulogizing at least one faculty member who died of the virus in the middle of its rage through Southeast Michigan. So, Jerome, how I imagined it was like a ball rolling down a hill. I mean, every day I woke up with new facts to be confronted with. And I would say not until the end of July did we start to get some grasp of the ability to plan more than 2 weeks out. And it's been really, really challenging, but also offers some glimpses of an institution to see where its strengths reside and where its weaknesses hide and how to address those.
Very good. Susan, I'll ask you that same question. How did you imagine your work would be affected by COVID-19?
I wear a number of hats. First and foremost was teaching. And so I was teaching 2 classes when all of this happened. So figuring out how to transition my students online, keep them engaged, make sure everybody had connection to technology was the big one that it took up a lot of my focus and time. And I mostly teach master's students and they are better equipped, I would say, than undergraduates to sort of independently plunge into doing their work remotely, and it largely went pretty smoothly. As a researcher, I was able to very quickly move my research team online. Pretty much we've been doing a lot of our work together online anyway. Data analysis and talking about data analysis can easily happen online. And then last, in terms of my sort of work as a commenter and engager in education policy, started to get worried really fast and speaking out pretty publicly about my worries, especially actually about K-12 and the younger children and the digital divide and how this was going to affect inequality in education. That's what I focus on in my research and my teaching. And this is just like a meteor landing among the dinosaurs. I'm just afraid, what the impact's going to be on the progress we've managed to make in closing some gaps in educational achievement and attainment in the U.S. and how we're going to get through this. Cheery.
We're going to come back and definitely talk some more about that in just a minute. Dexter, let me ask you, what did you think when you heard COVID-19 had arrived? How did you think your work life was going to change in the initial days?
Well, Jerome, March 11th was a tough day. I'll be honest, when we found out that a number of our plans were going to have to shift. We are a person-to-person culture where we interact with people face-to-face. And so a lot of my job is interacting with our employer partners, our community partners, and we like to be face-to-face where we can do site visits and check on the students and find out what does the community actually need, being able to have those conversations. And so there's also a large amount of travel in-state as well as out-of-state. All of those events were parked. And so pivoting into a digital space was challenging, but we've really found it to actually be a worthwhile shift. And I think we'll get into more of that as to how it affects the industry and how education partnered in that transition of learning also affects industry and how we have to be on the cutting edge. I think that it has come to a point where this COVID is really redefining all of our realities, not just in terms of work, but in terms of learning and how we manage our lives and our children and those that we have given ourselves to educate. And so we've just had to pivot, a very hard pivot, but it's been good.
So let me follow up on that, Dexter. You said, it's been a worthwhile shift. Do you say that because there really isn't any other possibility at this point? Or do you really feel like there are some things that you are really getting out of this different way that we're living right now?
I think it's twofold. I think that, yes, the world will change in terms of our perception of connectivity and how we can interact. However, I'm an optimist. I'm really hopeful that we will be able to get back to some level of interaction on a regular basis, but the way that that is managed will be different. I think also in terms of long-term strategies for learning, a lot of times we are creatures of habit. So we push off technology and we say, that'll be in the future, that's for my kids and my grandkids, and somebody else will be learning virtually. Well, now that is not possible. We all have to step into that space. I have friends that are leaders in the virtual learning space in the Dallas area. Responsive Education, they are the largest charter school network in the state of Texas, and they're doing brilliant things in terms of innovating learning, and they've had great success, and their business is absolutely booming, and they're expanding because they had the answer in terms of the solutions for how we need to teach. And so I think that this is really just pushing us all into the inevitable, where we have to come into another level of strategy, and we're not delaying that. Is what I'm trying to get at there.
Okay, all right, thanks, Dexter. Susan, let's jump to you along that line. I mean, this that we're talking about now is what you've been studying for a very long period of time. You mentioned the gap that we've been dealing with educationally and looking at the digital divide. Sort of where would you assess that we are right now, 6 months into COVID-19 affecting schools?
We largely we're in the dark, so we typically measure year to year progress in our K-12 schools by standardized tests and graduation rates, attendance rates. And I work with states and districts in analyzing these data. And what's attendance in this age? So we've got some troubling statistics about what share of students are logging in to their high school classes. We know there's enormous challenges in the K-12 setting with parents who need to work and can't be supervising their children. This and what we have in our economy is a real divide between people who are able to work from home, who are able to do virtual work like we're doing now. And while it's certainly a bother and a pain to supervise your kids while they're in school and you're trying to work, at least you're there. If you're somebody who works in a service position and needs to be out of the house, who's with your kids? So I don't think we have a real sense of how good or bad it is right now in K-12. In the world I work in, which is post-secondary, there's sort of two things going on. How many people are in school and what are they doing while they're there? We see there's just a report today that there's been a substantial drop in enrollment in community colleges, which is really troubling. Community colleges are traditionally where workers go to wait out recessions, to build their skills, so that once the upturn comes, inevitably as it does, they're ready to hit the workforce, and they're there for firms to hire them. And if they're not in the community colleges, then our pipeline is not as strong as it could be. Grad schools are doing better, and this again is, it's tale of two economies here, right? So community colleges serve the most disadvantaged in our society. People who go to grad school are those who actually manage to get a BA already, and they're the ones who are most able to handle these pressures. So I think we're going to see big differences depending on what part of the economy we're hiring out of, and what sectors we're hiring for, in terms of what impact this is going to have on hiring and the talent pool.
Russ, where do you gauge that we are right now? Are you seeing a large change in who's coming to your institution right now, or what sort of changes are you feeling?
Well, Susan's referencing a report that came in kind of the industry newspaper, which is the Chronicle of Higher Education, that did publish a report this morning that did note enrollment in higher education is down across the nation, but it's most severely down at community colleges. I tend to agree with some of the suppositions that Professor Donofsky laid out just now, that the population that is most affected by this pandemic is the population that most often accesses higher education through community colleges. You know, one of the tricks about populations in community colleges and higher ed generally is that we don't really have a good way to track it except post hoc. We look back and see what happened. So I, as I mentioned, agree with the professor about what I think probably is driving this, but we won't really know until maybe 6 months from now, maybe 12 months from now. And the irony about that is, in a pandemic, your suffering is more acute and really devastating for the people that you're trying to serve, particularly at a community college like us. Professor Donarski's right that our enrollment kind of is counter-cyclical to the busts and booms of the economy, but generally we've gotten pretty good as a society to deal with that. So that's not great, but we can deal with it. Now with this pandemic, we've never experienced that. So we're having populations that really need the kind of support that higher education institutions like ours, which are open access and low barriers to entry, both by distance and by cost, where we've got to actually try and lean in on this, which is why we're doing what we're doing. And I think you may have seen that the governor announced what I think is a national model here, or first in the nation, to help frontline workers during this pandemic access higher education at the community college level. I'm a big proponent. I do believe we can serve a group at the front line. Susan mentioned that need access to education, and of course the governor's program, which is called Futures for Frontliners, will eliminate the first barrier, which is the cost. So students and workers who are at the front lines during the pandemic can apply to go to any community college that they reside in, and any shortage of funding that they have for tuition will be covered by the state of Michigan. That's one way we can start answering the problems that have been discussed here. Now, again, we're kind of flying blind. We've never tried this before. We think there's a population out there. The governor believes that there's 650,000 people who are frontline workers or essential workers. And we tend to think that a lot of them will actually be interested in coming to college. We know 45,000 of them have already applied through this program, but we won't know until January how many can get to class and what class will look like, and how we can support them. That's the cutting edge, I think, where the study of the professor is working, where I'm working every day to try and serve these communities. These innovations are where I think we're going to be able to see if higher ed can respond to the community's needs.
I'll ask this of each of you, and I'll start with you, Russ, given your answer there. Is the state doing enough to support your efforts, or are there things you'd like to see the state do more to help you do what you're trying to do?
You know, you ask a college president if there's more that can be given and done, you know the answer there. But I'll just start with the things I think that the state is doing very, very well. And frankly, entities associated with industry like the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce and MICHauto, people realize that there's a real return on investment by getting citizens into higher education. I mean, the Detroit Promise is an example of that. Futures for Frontliners by the governor's action is an example of that. The legislature just passed a budget that funded one of the governor's initial tuition-free college programs. So we're moving in the right direction as a state by investing in our citizens getting into higher education. And we've got a really good infrastructure in higher education here in the state. I mean, there are a lot of options. Some people think there's even too many options, but right now I'll tell you, we need the options for students to get into higher education. So no complaints on that front. I will say though, for the last 15 years, we have not kept pace with our competitor states on funding higher education. We just haven't done that very, very well. And the first step was, I think, the governor's right decision to say we're going to try and make a growth in our number of citizens who have a post-secondary education credential. We're at 45% now. We need to get to 60% to be competitive. And just setting that out is the right step. But it's going to take investment, and we're already starting to see some of that. Now, citizens need to hold institutions accountable, and we're ready for that here. But that'll be the next thing that'll come.
All right. Susan?
Well, you know, the context that we went into this pandemic in was already kind of a dire one for post-secondary education, public institutions in particular. You know, so funding on a per pupil basis for for students in public institutions of post-secondary education has been dropping for decades. And it dropped particularly sharply during the last recession. So in January, I wrote a piece, a column for the New York Times, talking about what needed to happen in terms of funding for community colleges and public colleges in general before the next recession happened, and didn't realize the next recession was going to come so hard and so fast. And unfortunately, it all came true. You know, the states don't have the capacity to make up the funding losses that occur during a recession. You know, so our tax base shrunk dramatically during the Great Recession, and even more during this pandemic. And so states can't borrow to fill in that gap. They're constitutionally prevented from doing so in almost every state. So really, it's the feds that need to step up further. I think our state is doing everything it can with the resources it's got, and we need more resources from the feds who have the ability to borrow. So, you know, colleges need money to tech up, to be able to teach better. They need resources for testing and tracing so that they can reopen in a careful and gradual way when the time comes. And those resources need to come from the feds. I think that, again, Whitmer and the state are doing what they can with the resources they've got, but the state's got limited capacity to raise money right now, and money is what's needed.
Dexter, what's your perspective?
Well, I first want to say, I think this conversation is extremely valuable, and the perspective that Dr. Kalvuna and Dr. Dynowski are presenting is really contextually strengthening, because I think a lot of times employers don't understand the challenges that our educators are dealing with in terms of getting the knowledge into the students so that they are prepared for the workforce. I think also, Susan, you have a mom's perspective on some of this. I don't know if you have children, but I can hear that in, oh, you got two, in some of your evaluation of some of the challenges that teachers are facing, parents are facing, and these are very critical issues. You know, our children are our workforce. They are not even our future workforce. Some of them are our present workforce. And if we're not preparing them efficiently, we're really going to have challenges. We're doing some really innovative things in tech and learning. One of those is our partnership with Wayne State University and doing some things with short courses. Here this semester, there's a full master's in mobility that is going to be launched, and then also short courses where people that are not interested in obtaining a full degree can still partner. And so that is a funding benefit for our universities and our schools. If we can get more of those things in place, where we're taking every possible avenue to increase our learning and the efficiency in that in a virtual space, those short courses can be completed virtually. So you're upskilling and you're reskilling the workforce, and you're also reaching into the future with our youth and our young adults.
So Dexter, let me follow up on that and ask you, are there enough conversations happening between training, facilities, academia, and the auto industry? Because, you know, there was already a problem recruiting talent for the industry before the pandemic. Now that, you know, all of these new circumstances are going on, has that relationship changed? Are there more conversations, or do more conversations need to be taking place?
Well, I would echo Dr. Kalvuna in the fact that we always want more conversations. More conversations leads to more equity and more decisions being made, so that's great. I think connecting the dots is the challenge. So are the right people having the right conversations with the right people? And how do we bring more of the right people in the room together, even if that's a virtual room like this? I think that the state is working hard to make sure that we have more solutions brought to the table. For instance, myself being here is a result of the MICHA 2.0 grant that was awarded to us to begin working on educating and closing the talent gap. And so we're trying to do our small part, but there are so many people doing great work that we need to know more about. And so MICHauto hosting forums like this really is helping to bridge the gaps in the conversation. And I think it's not just the visible conversations, it's the follow through and the follow up. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that we're closing the gap by having the conversations, finding out what resources are out there. We're trying to get more knowledge on the Going Pro Talent Fund, similar to the funds that Dr. Kevlin mentioned that are available for education. You know, there are some things in place where those funds could potentially fund registered apprenticeships through the state. And so we want to make sure that we're tapping into all of those resources and then presenting those to the students and to community partners that can help us get those in the hands of people that need them the most.
All right. Russ, I saw you smile as Dexter was giving his answer, so go for it.
Yeah, I was just, most of us are in this line of work because we're passionate about changing lives through education. But because of that, we end up having to be proselytizers about how valuable this is and how much we need to have funding. So I was smiling because he's right. Half the time, if we're going to move the needle in the places we want, we have to convince people that are watching this right now that investment in education is worthy. And so I'll just make one more pitch. If there are employers on this webinar who have frontline staff, you've got a community college very likely very close to you. And those frontline staff members can now go to that community college starting in January for no tuition. And the studies are absolutely undoubtedly clear. More people with post-secondary credentials make for better communities in all metrics. And so there's really no better time than to try this with your staff. And if they're near Henry Ford College in Dearborn, reach out to me, because we're leaning in on this because we think that's one way we can help kind of lessen the difficulties that this pandemic has given to our population.
Susan?
There's no better time than an economic downturn to invest in people and to go to school. So one of the key costs of going to college traditionally is that you're not earning anything while you're going to work full time, and there's less of an opportunity cost this go around because the unemployment rate is so high. This is what has me so worried actually about, the forces are so strong pushing people into school during a recession that we're seeing a drop off in community college. It just has me very worried about what's happening to recent high school graduates. This is a crisis, and it's potentially an opportunity to restructure how we educate people, and I hope we rise to it.
All right. That is our time. I'll say thanks to Russ Kavalhuna, Susan Donarski, and Dexter Sullivan. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
And now I'll turn it back over to Glenn.
Well, thank you to all the panelists, as you just did, Jerome, but thank you to you. We really appreciate you taking the time, and you are as insightful and probing as you always are. So we appreciate it, and thanks for moderating today. I'll just turn it over to Carla, but before I do that, I want to just stress we'll follow up with the Q&A. If you've entered a question, you'll certainly be able to view this online. But we got a lot of talented and passionate people, not just about the auto industry that we work with, but educators, and you can hear from them today. And you heard from them today how passionate they are, and as Russ said, about leaning into this. And if we're all going to build Michigan and build our communities together for the future, it's going to depend on talent and people. As simple as that. So Carla, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn, and also thank you for conducting this series of webinars with the Center for Automotive Research. I think we got our call to action. It's time to engage our triple helix, get government, academia, and industry working together, not pointing fingers at one another, but coming together to really solve this talent pipeline in the industry. Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.